The farmhouse stood at the edge of the woods, its timbers blackened with age, its windows clouded as though reluctant to let the world look inside. For decades, the people of the town had whispered about Martha Wise, a woman whose presence was as unsettling as the cold draft that seemed to follow her into every room. She was not a beauty, not a woman given to charm or laughter, but there was something in her eyes that unsettled anyone who met them, a kind of unflinching watchfulness, as if she was always calculating, always waiting. Life had not been kind to her, and in return, she had promised not to be kind to life. Her husband had died young, leaving her to raise children alone in that weather-beaten house. Loneliness sat on her shoulders like a shawl, heavy and choking. She found herself cast aside by family, mocked by neighbors, dismissed by those who thought her strange, unworthy of sympathy. When grief curdled into bitterness, she discovered a dark truth. She did not have to raise her hand in violence to ruin another. There were subtler ways, quieter methods, ways that left no immediate trace. It was a knowledge that suited her nature. At first, it began with small cruelties. A neighbor's cow fell ill after grazing near her field. Chickens dropped dead in the yard of a cousin who had slighted her. Accidents, they called them. Bad luck. Yet behind closed doors, Martha smiled to herself. She had learned about poisons in the old herbal books her mother once kept. Seeds and roots, flowers too beautiful to suspect, all could be coaxed into serving her need for vengeance. If life had denied her warmth, she would embrace the chill of revenge. The feud with her family sharpened after her children were taken from her care, placed into the hands of relatives who claimed she was unfit. The humiliation festered inside her like an untreated wound. To Martha, it was not mere custody, it was theft. They had stolen her flesh and blood, judged her unworthy, made her the object of gossip in every corner of town. She swore, silently, that they would pay. And she waited, patient as winter. The first death was almost too easy. A relative fell ill after a family gathering, the symptoms vague at first. Dizziness, nausea, a weakness that spread through the body like frost over glass. Doctors muttered about influenza, pneumonia, the mysterious ailments that carried off the unlucky. By the time they lowered him into the earth, Martha had already chosen her next victim. She attended the funeral dressed in black, her face set in lines of solemn grief, though her heart pulsed with a savage satisfaction. Death followed her like a shadow. Another relative sickened, and another, the pattern so subtle that even whispers took time to grow. Neighbors began to wonder why tragedy seemed to linger wherever Martha Wise walked, why her kin succumbed to illnesses that appeared without warning and ravaged without mercy. Yet suspicion is not proof, and Martha carried herself with the weight of a wronged woman, her expression one of eternal mourning. To question her openly felt almost cruel, as though her sorrow was already punishment enough. But beneath her calm exterior, Martha reveled in her secret power. She knew the exact measurements to grind, the precise infusion to brew. She relished the way poison was patient, how it mirrored her own nature. It crept into a body silently, dismantling it piece by piece, until the victim was left hollow-eyed and gasping, their fate sealed long before anyone thought to intervene. Each time she prepared a meal or poured a drink, she felt the intoxicating thrill of control. Life and death rested in her hands, and she wielded them without hesitation. The town could not look away forever. Too many graves, too many mourners, too many coincidences. The family who once mocked her now whispered in fear, but by then it was too late. Their tables had already been tainted, their blood already marked by the slow cruelty of her vengeance. When the authorities finally pieced together the pattern, when they looked at the cluster of deaths and traced the common thread back to Martha, the horror was already done. Her arrest brought no cries of protest, no pleas for her release. By then, she had become something other than human in the minds of those around her, a figure of legend, a cautionary tale about what bitterness can breed when it festers unchecked. Some said she was possessed, touched by the devil himself. Others whispered that she was simply born that way, carved from ice, incapable of love. Whatever the truth, Martha Wise remained calm as they led her away, her face untroubled, her eyes colder than ever. She never wept, never begged forgiveness, never confessed remorse. To her, every death was justified, every grave a payment collected for the humiliations she had endured. They thought they had stripped her of power, but in her mind, she had already won. She had shown them what it meant to cross her, to steal from her, to believe her incapable of striking back. And so her name lingered long after she was gone, carried on the lips of townsfolk like a curse, told in hushed voices by those who feared the chill of her memory. Martha Wise had proved that revenge was not fiery or sudden, but cold, patient, and merciless. It was a winter that never thawed, a frost that never lifted, a punishment that outlived her body. In the end, she became her own legend, a woman who turned grief into a weapon, loneliness into fury, and vengeance into something far more lasting than love. The wind that curled around the old farmhouse carried with it more than the smell of smoke from the stove or the damp rot of the nearby woods. It carried whispers, the kind that spread from porch to porch and across the pews of the church, whispers that warned children not to linger near Martha Wise's land, not to accept her food, not even to meet her gaze too long. Yet the whispers came too late for those who had already crossed her, for by the time suspicion sharpened into fear, the poison had already seeped through veins, silent and unseen. Her vengeance had become a rhythm, a ritual almost holy in its precision. She would grind the bitter seeds late at night, the sound muffled beneath the hum of cicadas and the creak of the house settling on its old bones. By the dim glow of a lantern, her hands, steady, practiced, measured out death like an apothecary of shadows. She took no pleasure in the act of mixing itself. The satisfaction lay in watching her victims afterward, in the slow decline that no doctor could halt, no prayer could reverse. She would watch, quietly, from across a dinner table or a bedside, her face unreadable as the poison did its work. The town doctor was baffled. He scribbled notes about stomach ailments, about sudden fevers, about nervous collapse. He suspected bad water, spoiled food, even a family curse. But the dead did not speak, and the living were too frightened to accuse. In the silence that followed each funeral, Martha stood with hands folded neatly in front of her, her lips pressed into a thin line of solemnity. Those who wept could not see the flicker of something else in her eyes, a gleam that betrayed satisfaction, the cold pleasure of debts being collected. The children whispered the loudest. They swore they saw her wandering the graveyard after dusk, her black shawl blending with the shadows of the yew trees, her pale face like a smudge of moonlight between the stones. Some claimed she bent low over the earth as though whispering to the dead, keeping communion with the ones she had sent ahead. Whether it was true or not no longer mattered. In their minds, she was not just a widow with strange habits. She was a conjurer of death, a woman whose soul had turned rotten with spite. Still, Martha was not reckless. Her revenge was deliberate, meticulous, as cold and calculating as the frost that gathered on window panes before dawn. She never chose her victims at random. Each name on her list was marked by betrayal, insult, or defiance. To her, this was not murder, it was justice, justice that no court, no church, no God had been willing to grant her. Every sickness, every coffin lowered into the ground, was a verdict she had delivered with her own hand. But vengeance breeds its own ruin. The more deaths that followed her, the heavier the suspicion grew. It was not one grave that condemned her, but a trail of them, all bearing her family's names, all linked by the same mysterious decline. The sheriff, grim and reluctant, finally acted. When they came to take her, Martha offered no struggle, no cries of innocence. She looked at them with the calm of someone who had long expected this ending. Her eyes, pale and glinting, met theirs with the chilling assurance of a woman who believed herself untouchable. In the courthouse, the whispers grew louder than ever. She sat stiff-backed, her shawl draped neatly, her expression one of quiet disdain for the proceedings. The prosecutor painted her as a monster, the defense as a lonely, misunderstood widow. But when the names of the dead were read aloud, when the litany of the poisoned filled the air like a dirge, there was no saving her. The jury did not see a woman wronged. They saw a woman who had made herself into an instrument of death. Martha Wise was sentenced, but even confinement did not break her. Behind the bars, she remained eerily composed, knitting in her cell, humming old hymns, her mind no doubt replaying her victories. She lived out her years in the gray chill of prison walls, but she carried her vengeance with her like a crown. She never begged forgiveness, never confessed guilt. To the very end, she held on to her belief that she had simply given the world what it had given her: coldness, cruelty, and silence. When she finally died, the town did not mourn. There were no candles in the windows, no procession of carriages, no whispered prayers of mercy. But still, her name lingered. Children grew up hearing the story of Martha Wise, the widow whose grief had soured into wrath, whose vengeance had outlived even the grave she filled. And in that small town, long after her bones turned to dust, people still locked their doors at night, still refused food offered by strangers, still felt the air grow colder when her name was spoken. For they knew that Martha had proved a truth too terrifying to ignore. Revenge is not swift fire, not the flash of sudden rage. It is ice in the blood, slow and merciless, patient enough to wait a lifetime if need be. It is, as Martha Wise herself had shown, a dish best served cold.